Before I start, how many of you have some experience with bonsai trees? Okay, and the rest are, okay, because I'm going to try to go through not just the styling of the trees, but to tell you a little bit about bonsai, etc., etc. Okay, the material I'm going to work on, it's a Japanese black pine. It was field grown. Normally, when you get a piece of material, the first thing you want to do is to sort of take a look at the material and try to determine what the front of the tree is going to be and what the back of the tree. Bonsai, three-dimensional objects, they have a front and a back. It's important to, in terms of the styling of the tree, to decide what's going to be the front. Now, I'm going to rotate this around. I mean, clearly, this isn't much of a front. Yeah, if I were to use this as the front. Similarly here, and the reason I say it isn't much of a front, this beautiful curve in the trunk, if you use this as a front, it's completely hidden. You don't see this. The tree has been potted appropriately. There are two choices for the front. One, so. Second one here. Now, if I were a democratic person, we could say, well, let's vote, etc., etc. I'm not democratic. I make the choices, but I'm going to try to explain to you why. This here is not a particularly good front for the tree. I mean, again, you see the movement in the trunk, but the part for the apex leans back, comes out. So if I wanted to make this a front, I would actually have to tilt the tree so. Yeah. Whereas if I choose this as the front, I've got what will eventually be the apex at the forward on the trunk. You can see a mess of stuff has been removed here. And the tree leans forward a little bit. The reason you want the tree to lean forward a bit, it's a question of perspective. Yeah? There's no horticultural reason for it. It basically gives you a better feel for the tree. Yeah? So I mean, this is what I'm going to use as the front. Now, with a piece of material like this, it's obviously been cut back, not allowed to grow. Bark is really, really nice on the tree. One of the things with most bonsai trees, and in particular pine trees or conifer trees, it's not the size of the tree that determines the price. Yeah? Very often what it is, it's the bark. Yeah? I mean, if you think about something like a larch grow very quickly. I can buy a seedling or of larch, and in 4 or 5 years, I can have a tree that's 8 or 9 foot high or more if I don't cut it back. The problem is if I look at this 8 or 9 year old tree, it has smooth bark. Yeah? It takes about 15 or 20 years for the bark to develop to a stage like this. So, I mean, when you look at a bonsai tree, if you go up and look in the exhibition, one of the first things that should attract your eye is the lower part of the tree. What one is generally interested in is the nabari. The nabari is just the spread of the roots. With this tree, it's been potted a while ago. It doesn't have particularly good nabari, but what it does have is beautiful bark. Yeah? When you have something on a tree that you consider to be beautiful, you know, whether it's a branch or the rootage or so, this is, when you style the tree, this is the thing that you want to draw attention to. So one of the things that I don't want to do in styling this tree, I mean, pines are really beautiful because, I mean, they're very flexible. I can pretty much put anything anywhere I want it. But one of the things that I don't want to do is, say, to pull down all of the branches like this and cover up the trunk. Yeah? What I want to do is to complement the trunk. So as you look at a tree, I mean, normally, whether it's in the botanical gardens or on your street or a bonsai tree, normally when you view a tree, when you look at a tree, yeah, the general way that you look at it is you start at the base of the tree and you look up. Yeah? You go up the trunk of the tree. Now, in terms of styling bonsai trees, one of the things in bonsai, simplicity is always the best. You never want to have a situation where you go up the trunk of the tree and you have the trunk splits or bifurcates into two pieces which are roughly the same size. Because as you're looking up the tree, you have to make a decision. Yeah? Do I look this way or do I look that way? Yeah? So generally what you want is a nice trunk line that's sort of uninterrupted. Yeah? And again, in this case, clearly the focal point of the tree here, the foliage in a certain sense is just going to dress the trunk. Yeah? It's, you know, what I'm going to try to do is to have this so that you'll look at this and you'll say, ah, it's very, very nice, but it's got a beautiful trunk. Yeah? Okay. In bonsai, one of the most difficult things to learn or to understand is when you begin to style the tree. Yeah? Basically, before you put wire on the tree, etc., you want to get rid of everything you don't need. Yeah? In other words, you want to get down to the essential of the tree. I mean, here, life is very, very nice. Up here, what I've got is a big clump of foliage. I don't see any structure in the tree. Okay, so what I'm going to start to do is I'm going to get rid of, I mean, this is an interesting branch. It's about 1.5 inches above the soil level. It does absolutely nothing, you know, regardless of whether I put it here or here for the design of the tree. So we'll get rid of that. I'm just going to clean out some of the stuff that I don't think I'm going to need, and then I'm going to shorten some branches. Remember, well, don't remember, but let me remind you, good bonsai trees are generally compact. What do I mean by compact? If I go out into the gardens here and look at an old pine tree, very often what happens is the tree grows, the branches elongate, the growing tips is where all of the action takes place. They haven't been clipped back, so the tree gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah? In terms of the design of a bonsai tree is what I would really like to achieve is that the tree is reasonably compact. That is to say that I don't have any unnecessarily long branches. The second thing, when I start to style a tree, and again, no horticultural reason for this, generally, if I think about the shape of a tree, conifers, many deciduous trees, they generally have a tendency to grow in a triangular shape. Bottom branches are the longest, upper branches near the apex, smaller in diameter, but also in length. So I mean, in order to give the tree the feeling of age, I would like to have something like a triangular shape. But in terms of triangular shapes, there are many alternatives. I could make it like an equilateral triangle, so that it's perfectly symmetric. Or I can make it more asymmetric. Again, there is no horticultural choice that says this is better than that. However, optically, if the tree is asymmetric, it looks better. Yeah? So, I mean, one of the things that I also would like to do in a tree like this is I need to have a bottom branch that comes out. Yeah? I have to have some type of directionality. In other words, I don't want the bottom branch to come out like this, the trunk to lean like this, and the apex to go back here. What I would like is that everything flows in roughly the same direction. If I'm going to make the tree asymmetric, as I prune the tree, what I have to kind of remember is I actually would like to have, again, this asymmetric shape. So in other words, I want to prune heavier on one side than on the other side. Now, clearly, if I look at this tree with the bottom branch here, yeah, the directionality of the tree, in my opinion, goes from, I guess, my left to right. Yeah? In other words, so. Yeah? Now, again, as with any piece of material, I mean, unfortunately, in all of the years that I've been doing bonsai, I have never come across a piece of either nursery material or, when I used to collect a lot, a piece of material where you say, I'll dig this tree up, or I'll take this tree out of the pot, put it into a bonsai pot, and I'm finished. There are always some things that have to be corrected. Yeah? Now, in particular with pines, if you think about the way pines grow, generally, if I think about the trunk or the branches, it grows sort of like a wagon wheel. You have a point, you have a whole mess of branches coming out from one point, and then the tree gets a little higher. This you want to eliminate. Okay, the horticultural reason for this is if you leave all of these branches here, the part of the trunk where these branches are will gradually thicken with age. If it thickens with age, I will wind up with a tree that has what's known as inverse taper. In other words, if you think about a tree in nature, normally the base of the tree is the widest, and as I go up the tree, it gradually narrows. It has taper. What I want to avoid is going up the trunk of the tree and then suddenly having the trunk widen and then get a little smaller. Now, one way to prevent this is in this place where I have wagon wheel branches coming out, I want to eliminate most of these. Now, what does most of these mean? Well, again, for aesthetic reasons, generally what I want to avoid is having two branches come out at the same point, at different sides of the trunk. Yeah? I mean, these are sometimes called handlebar branches, etc., etc. I either want to get rid of one and have something like this. If I have two and they do come out at the same point and there's no other branches in the vicinity, what I would like to do is raise one and lower the other. Yeah? It's kind of cheating a little bit, but it then gives the appearance that I don't have branches coming out from the same point. Now, the other thing is, as I mentioned, bonsai are three-dimensional objects. Okay. What I want to avoid doing when I style the tree is to wind up with a two-dimensional tree. A two-dimensional tree means that all of the branches come out from the left or the right. Nothing comes out from the front, and nothing comes out from the back. Yeah? Because these are three-dimensional objects, and because I want to, again, convey the idea of this, generally what I want to make sure is surprisingly, not that I have a lot of growth in the front of the tree, I want a lot of growth in the back of the tree. In other words, I would like, in an ideal tree, if I were to draw a line that bisected the tree, yeah, I would like 60% of the foliage in the back and 20 or 30% of the foliage in the front. Yeah? Again, gives me a feeling of depth in the tree. Yeah? It reinforces the idea that I'm working with a three-dimensional object, not a two-dimensional object. Yeah? Here, we've got a lot of stuff I'm going to now anything, again, if I think about particularly a spruce is a good example, an old spruce, I wind up with these patterns where the branches come out, the primary branches, they form secondary and tertiary branches. But all of these are basically, to within a certain extent, in a certain plane. Yeah? Plane may be thick, but then I wind up with the next plane, the next plane, the next plane. In other words, I see in the tree, I can see the different branches, yeah? And I can also see the fact that the tree has had enough time to spread out and to grow. Yeah? So I mean, when I work at, I mean, I'm just, right now, the only thing I'm doing is basically thinning the tree out. The more I thin the tree, I hope the more you begin to see the ultimate shape of the tree. Yeah? And right now I'm just cutting off branches. I haven't wired anything, etc., etc. But what I try to do is simply to select, and for instance here I've got a mess of branches. I want to avoid with time that a bulge forms here. So I'm going to reduce this down to simply 2 branches. I mean, when you work initially on a piece of material like this, which hasn't been styled, I mean, I'm always reminded of the joke about the duck carver. How do you carve a duck out of a piece of wood? Well, you get rid of all of the stuff in the wood that doesn't look like a duck. It's the same thing here. The other thing is eventually we're going to have to wire the tree. Fewer branches you have, the less wiring you have to do. Yeah? So I mean, it's a good idea. Again, same thing in here. Generally, what's called crotch growth. I mean, if I look at a couple of branches, either a branch coming into the trunk, where the branches bifurcate or the branch grows away from the trunk, in this little area here, this is the crotch. I generally, very often on younger trees, have a lot of growth there. This is not considered to be ideal. And should be removed. Anything that grows straight up or straight down, I generally want to get rid of. When I get through cutting back the tree, there will be something left to wire, I can assure you. In the first styling of a tree like this, basically what you want to do is get the basic structure of the tree. Correct. After that, it simply has got to grow. again, here I removed a rather thick branch, and the reason I did, it was high up, this piece here. And in other words, compared to the rest of the branches, okay, little by little, just with I want to say a pair of scissors. These are actually very, very sharp pliers that I like to use for Now, when I say even in a very good piece of material, there are always problems. One of the problems, if I look up at this section of the tree, yeah? Can anybody see this? Okay, two things. One, I go from a big trunk into something that's reasonably small. But both of these pieces here, if I keep them, are reasonably straight. The tree, again, the trunk has a nice curve to it. I would like to emphasize if you do get a tree and do something like this, you really want to make sure I can cut things back, but once I cut them back on, I can't glue them back in place. So when you kind of remove a branch, you don't want to have, the worst four-letter word that you have in bonsai is when you cut a branch and then you say, oops. You want to avoid an oops moment. Now eventually when I'm finished with the tree, or as I said, or when the tree is finished with me, depending on your point of view, one of the things that makes bonsai trees look nice, if you go up, generally needles grow in all different directions around the branch. But if I want to have clear delineation of different branch pads or so, what I want to do is to remove the needles that come down. Yeah? So eventually I'm going to wind up plucking a mess of needles. But first let's take a look, see at what we have here.
most of these branches.
Okay, the only problem right now, the thing that I dislike about the tree, I mean, I like the tree, but I mean, the one problem that I don't like this little short stubby piece here for two reasons. One, it's reasonably high up on the tree, and it's thick. Two, it's perfectly straight. Now I can bend this, yeah, but I can't make it thinner. Well, I can. As I said, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make this thinner. I'm going to kill the branch, and I'm going to make what's known as gin. Not the stuff you drink, but basically what gin means is I'm going to strip off the bark. With live wood, it's reasonably easy to do. If you simply, on pines, it's really easy to do with live wood. If you simply use a pair of pliers, these are ginning pliers, and crush the bark. What this does is it loosens the bark up from the cambium, it becomes loose, and then you can basically peel it off. Now, as I said, okay, it's still reasonably, I mean, I've made it a little bit smaller, but there isn't any taper in the branch, yeah. I'm going to try to fix that. It's a lot thinner now. I mean, again, this is reasonably supple, so I can bend it, I can wire it. In fact, I think I just want to make a little bit shorter. See. eventually, not right away, but in a couple of weeks, this piece of gin, or manufactured deadwood, when it dries out enough so that a lot of the resins come out, it can be painted with lime sulfur. This does two things. One, it will whiten the branch, the piece. You can mix a little India ink in to get it to be gray or white, depending on what your choice is. And it also protects the wood. Lime sulfur is, it gets, any kind of infestations or so that happen. Now, notice around the bark here, around the trunk here, I have a really nice, well-defined piece. The reason that this is so is in the beginning, what I did was I took my cutters and went around and cut the bark, so that when I peel the bark off, I'm not peeling off a mess of the trunk. Yeah? Okay, I guess we can begin to think about wiring the tree. Yeah? Again, I want the flow of the tree to be this way. Yeah? Okay, when you wire a tree, generally the best way to do this is to start at the bottom and wire up. Now, the important thing when you wire is that the wire is always anchored. And what do I mean by anchored? If I just take a piece of wire and wrap it around here, this branch can flop wherever it wants to go. Generally, when you talk a bit about anchoring branches, what you want to do, if at all possible, is to wire two branches with one piece of wire. Now, again, what I like to do is, rather than, for instance, wire all the way out and then come back and wire, again, I want this wire to remain tight. So I make a couple of turns around the one branch. This anchors the wire on this branch. And then I come with the second branch, with the wire, and now, how thick a wire should I use? Well, I want to use a wire that is thick enough so that when I bend the branch, it stays in place. Now, generally with conifers, if you talk to the purists in the field, what they will tell you is that you should only use copper wire. Why? Both copper and aluminum wire are annealed. What this means is they're heat treated so that the wire softens. The minute you bend copper wire, it hardens. Now, problem with copper wire is you've got one shot at it. It hardens, but then you can't undo things. So you have to be pretty sure about what you're going to do. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is copper much, much stronger than aluminum. What this means is you can get away with a much smaller piece of wire to do the job. Now, with aluminum wire, you always have to use a thicker piece of wire. Now, the good news about using aluminum wire, it's probably about 40% cheaper, 30 or 40% cheaper than copper wire. That's the first thing. The second thing is if you use aluminum wire, again, you're using a thicker piece of wire. Again, it should be wrapped tightly onto the branch, but because it's thicker, with thinner wire, you wire tightly, it's easier for it to bite in and form a wire mark on the branch. With aluminum wire, because it's thicker, it resists a bit more, in my opinion, wire bite.
By the way, if you have any questions while I'm up here rambling away, please feel free.
I've got different thickness wires. The thicker the branch. Yeah.
If you're trying to make a thicker trunk by putting 3 or 4 trees together,
yeah,
should you peel the bark off
one side
of it first?
Yes. And then what you would like to do is press the cambium together and wrap it.
And what do you wrap it with?
I use Chinese string because it's cheap. You can use raffia. You can use
Baling twine?
Baling twine, you can, yes. Yeah. You want something that spreads out a bit.
How long does it take for them to adhere together?
It depends on the species. Like for instance, most of my figs are what are known as fused trunk. I've taken anywhere from 20 to 50 cuttings, wrapped them together, and shaped the tree. Figs grow quickly, so this is about a 6 months to a year thing. Maple a year or two should. Trident maples in particular. Yeah.
And you fuse them together down at the bottom. And you have all the branches on the top. You wire them out right away, or
well, if you want growth in the trunk of a tree, people will tell you sacrifice branches, etc., etc. But the best way to thicken up a trunk is to let the apex grow. Yeah. Okay. And then cut it back. Yeah. So again, it really depends on the species. Yeah, you have to check.
White paper birch.
No experience there, but you should be able to do it. I mean, birch is kind of a funny animal in the sense that
I'm trying to make a forest. I got 18 of them out that tall.
yeah,
We just cut the tops off.
yeah. I mean, the problem, one of the reasons, and I always think it's a shame that there aren't a lot, I mean, birch are very beautiful, particularly European birch, the white bark stuff, not the river birch. But if you look in the bonsai books, you seldom see birch bonsai. And the question is why? Well, unfortunately, one of the shortcomings of birch, even in nature, is they're a reasonably short-lived tree. A pine like this will live a couple of hundred years. I mean, assuming it's not chopped down or has some kind of infestation. The lifetime of birch, European birch, average lifetime is maybe 35, 40 years. So, I mean, you make this tremendous investment in styling or making a forest or whatever you want. Just when it gets nice, the trees begin to perish. So, I mean, this is kind of one of the reasons that in spite of the fact that I like birch, yeah. In fact, at my house, I sort of planted a grove of birch trees. I'm waiting for them to get 15 feet tall with nice white bark. Haven't quite got there yet. But on the other hand, I know that a limited lifetime. But then again, at my age, what happens in 50 years or so is a bit irrelevant. You know? By the way, one thing when you work on things like figs or pines that have a lot of pitch in them, a very easy way to remove the pitch is simply to take baby lotion, rub it over your hands, it cleans them up immediately.
After you're done wiring, how long do you leave the wire on before you remove it?
Until it starts to bite in. You know? Unfortunately, right now, this is the uninteresting part of the demonstration, because what you get to do is watch me put wire on all of the branches. Okay, go to sleep, you know, talk to your neighbor, do whatever you want. When it comes time to do the bending and the shaping, I'll wake you up. Yeah.
But if you want the tree to look nice, unfortunately, or go look around and come back in about 15, 20 minutes.
Wiring is something that requires, well, personally, I never attempt to wire a tree if I'm in the process of having what I consider to be a lousy day. You want to be calm and, you know, do things in a not in a rush. Again, if you look at the way that I'm applying wire, for those of you who haven't had experience, the most important thing when you do the wiring is not the hand that wraps the wire, it's your other hand, in my case my left hand. With my left hand, what I try to do is to guide the wire where I want it to go. It's a good idea if you can to avoid crossing wires. And the reason for it, I mean, the question was asked, well, you know, how long do you leave the wire on? Well, you actually leave the wire on until it begins to bite in. One of the things you have to remember is you do not necessarily have to remove all of the wire at one time. If you find that it's biting in on this branch, you can cut the wire off here. If the wire crosses, this is a problem. If it doesn't cross, you can simply snip and remove the wire.
Now it's well, we're getting some of these very small branches. I'm not going to wire. They're simply bear with me for another 5 to 10 minutes. Actually should have brought a little bit thinner wire for some of these.
Okay, wake up all of you people who are left. After a while you get sort of tired of wiring, and I can always tell when I get tired of wiring. I try to take some shortcuts. Now, what I would ideally like to do is each one of the ends here, to bend them up slightly.
When you bend the wire, or bend the branch, you sort of want to bend the wire. Yes.
This is what I've begun now to do. What I'm going to try to do is, even though it's a small tree,
To adjust. The nice thing, as I said, with pines, you can put the branches pretty much wherever.
again, I'm just going to try to clean up a little bit the needles. Actually, removing the needles at this time is not a bad idea. tree, Japanese black pine, are very, very forgiving. They bud back easily. What I'm hoping with this tree is by reducing the number of needles, if the tree has forgiven me for the tree has actually forgiven me for this beating it's taken today. Hopefully in about 5 or 6 weeks it should start to okay, I think that's pretty much what I want to do with this tree. Okay, in terms of aftercare, I probably am going to take this tree, I'm not going to put it outside, I'm going to put it into my greenhouse for a bit to let it recover. Mist the tree frequently, and basically just keep an eye on Japanese black pine, this idea of pointing things up, the tips do a really, good job of this when they. But I think that's pretty much what I wanted to do with the tree. It now needs some recovery time. Again, as you can see, as I remove the needles from underneath, it makes the tree look cleaner, neater. You actually, to get new buds or so, you only need 2 or 3 needles. Now, you don't need, 10,000 needles. Okay, that's it.